name is Schroeder. I'm a proud citizen activist and the co-founder of Turning Green, a nonprofit around environmental education and advocacy that I had the privilege to co-found here in the Bay Area about 12 years ago. We champion all of these regenerative practices. We've launched a school lunch program that is 100% fresh, local, organic, seasonal, non-GMO. It's scratch-cooked food. We piloted in Marin City, and we just ran a successful pilot right here in Richmond last year that will be going into West Contra Costa County. It's my honor to be here with you today. I'll be somewhat of your guide throughout the rest of the afternoon. Programs will be arriving soon, but if you have questions in the interim, there are volunteers all around, so come and talk to us. When I speak about environmentalism with young people, with all people, about climate change, about conservation, about solutions, about eco-education, about healthy living, I now have a solution to put forth. Soil. Soil is the new bottom line. This is what we are talking about as we move forward when we think about how this affects us all: regenerative agriculture, drawdown, agroecology, cultivating new farmers, holistic science. We're talking about solutions, about a paradigm shift within reach. So today we think about how these issues of environmentalism affect our global family. We send out prayers to those being affected by extreme weather events right now, at this very moment, and double down on our commitment to talk about the realities of climate change and to talk about the solutions we put forth here at Soil Not Oil. It is now my privilege to invite to the stage a man that I have known for many years, on the steering committee of Soil Not Oil, the founder of Nutiva, a company proudly based right here in Richmond that has planted fruit trees in all of the schools to talk about regenerative agricultural solutions to climate change. So I now give you John Roulac.
As many of you might be aware, I've been focused on environmental solutions since I've been a young man, and been really interested in the role of agriculture and climate over the last 4 or 5 years, focusing on that. But in the last year and a half, it came to me that one of the big issues that's not really discussed in the agricultural and climate change movement is the oceans. And where do you think all that carbon that's from the poor tillage practices, where do you think all the carbon from burning oil here at the Chevron facility or Exxon or all the different places, where do you think that carbon ends up when it's in the atmosphere? Where do you think it goes sometimes? In the oceans. So we're going to talk about the oceans in peril and what we can do to save them. And to me, the number one environmental issue in the world today, if we don't resolve it in the next few years, is the oceans. And it's all connected. How many people know this visionary scientist and designer here? Bucky Fuller. Let's give it up for Bucky. He's a great person. We can learn a lot. This is a great quote. Technology evolved by man is amateurish compared to the elegance of non-humanly contrived regeneration. He was onto that word a little earlier, huh? Man does not recognize technology other than his own, so he speaks of the rest as something he ignorantly calls nature. Think about that. How many people have seen this book by Paul Hawken, Drawdown? Really encourage you. It lists 100 of the top solutions for climate change, and interestingly, one of the top solutions right up there is actually, if you combine women's education and young girls' education, is the #1 solution to climate change. And also interestingly, because they make better decisions, 15 of the top 25 solutions to climate change is land-based. So there's a lot of things we can do with soil. But we're going to talk a little about oceans. And at the breakout session, we're going to do an hour and a half breakout session, the Bermuda room, at 11:30, or probably maybe we're running a little late, maybe 11:45. And we're going to focus on some of this oceans in greater depth and how we're going to regenerate some of the coastline here in California with our kelp forests. And Aaron from Lift Economy and Dan Marquez is a good friend of mine from Santa Barbara who has the 25-acre lease to start farming giant kelp in Santa Barbara, but he's got a few little hurdles in front of him on it, but he's going to be joining us. This is potentially California's next billion-dollar regenerative crop, and the idea is that we can reforest, regrow the oceans. I know this seems like a strange concept, and we're going to talk a little about that today and why that's important. Right today, there's over 12 million tons of seaweed that's harvested on an annual basis on the globe, and most of that's in China. It's a $5 billion market. How many people have heard of maxi crop, if you're a farmer? We're using maxi crop, and it's imported from Norway. What about if we could create harvest from the ocean with no pesticides, no fertilizers, not eating any fresh water, and harvest that and do that right here in California or on the West Coast? And giant kelp is a keystone species here along the coast, and it's really having some significant challenges, but it supports the aquatic life, hundreds of aquatic life. I was recently in the San Juan Islands in Washington State, near Canada, and noticed a spider crab that was crawling up the kelp forest there. There's a great video called A Forest of the Sea. If you really want to learn about the importance of kelp, I encourage you to go to YouTube, A Forest of the Sea. It was done in 1983. It was a time capsule of what our kelp forests used to look like. And we're going to get into about some of the challenges then. Unfortunately, I'm going to share some not so good news about our oceans. Our oceans are in trouble, serious trouble. We live on an ocean planet, not a land planet. Though we're so land-centric, we tend to focus on the land. Here's a collapse of the sardine population you can see. And it all starts with the plankton, and then the fish, and then the sea pups. Many of them have been starving because they don't have the food here on the California coast. This is a campaign I haven't launched quite yet, but it talks about climate change is real, and these dying plankton, the dead coral reefs, but these characters here believe that climate change is a hoax, and unfortunately they're influencing a lot of people. I call them the Dead Ocean Society. In the Indian Ocean, over 30% of the plankton has died, and this was from a report, a German scientific agency. This was over 10 years ago. And the phytoplankton are the basis for the ocean health. This is where the life begins in the ocean. If you walked in the high-tech Silicon Valley today, down the corridors of Facebook or Google, and you asked them, well, where's your oxygen being produced? Do you think many people don't know? It's like some factories producing it. But the ocean produces 2/3 of our oxygen. And our food system is literally destroying our oxygen system by putting so much carbon absorbing into that. Luckily, we have an app for that, and we learned that from Ray's presentation, what we know. Regenerative agriculture can return that carbon. It's really a food-producing, water-conserving asset. And by doing that, we can pull that carbon from the ocean and put it back into the soils. And the oceans are warming at a very rapid rate. And that's one of the issues. It's absorbing the heat. Over 90% of the excess heat and 30% of the CO2. In the last 50 to 100 years, the pH, the acidity has increased by 30%. And when you do tests and you take the phytoplankton and you put it and you increase the acidification of what we're going to see in the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years, the shells and the phytoplankton, what do you think happens to them? They just dissolve. So either we put the carbon back into the soil and start to restore the oceans, or 90% of all species, in my view, by 2040 or 2050, and of course you don't hear the scientists say this so much, will be gone. 90% of all species on the planet. I'm so sick and tired of the climate movements, like the sea level will rise 3 feet by 2100. Seems to be the punchline for all these articles. We won't even be around to be measuring 2100 if we don't deal with the carbon now. Thank you. Marine permaculture, and for folks who want to come to our session, we'll get into some more of the detail. It can tap in to create thriving ecosystems, has the ability to transform vast ocean areas. We can grow, there's two types of systems. You can grow it way out into the oceans, and we can also grow it close to the coastline, which in growing native species of seaweeds and kelps. You can power it by ocean thermal energy to upwell to bring down some of the colder, more nutrient-dense water up to the surface. There's a project in Australia right now that's being funded by the Australian government that's going to go live next year on a 10 meter by 30 meter platform, 70 feet below the surface of the ocean, to grow some of these native seaweeds. And no inputs are needed, and it creates blue-green business jobs. So if you came across this mountain, and let's just say you were the person who was in charge of this area, this mountain, what would you do? Would you place a fence around it and prevent the humans in, and just say, we're going to preserve this area here, we're going to keep the humans out, and we're just going to let nature restore it? Or would you reforest it by planting native species? The vision of people who are involved in this ocean restorative farming movement, and I've only been involved in this for this last year, and we've been having a series of meetings here in California, working with Lift Economy and other folks who've helped organize it. We have one coming up in San Francisco. It's an invite only, with people who are practitioners and scientists. And Bren Smith, you might have heard of Bren Smith from Rhode Island. He was a keynote speaker at Bioneers. Is that we can reforest the oceans. And the ocean movement, a lot of the oceans folks their ideas is to do marine protection zones. But when you regrow the kelp and some of these things, it's attractant to the habitat. So, and it can also sequester carbon, and it has the potential to replace carbon-centric materials such as animal feed, energy, fertilizers, and also cosmetics and food. It's still very early stages. There's a lot of questions. What will be the market? How are we going to process it? How are we going to permit it? And we'll be getting a little more in the Bermuda room. But it's another way to using permaculture and ecological design to help restore the oceans and be part of that solution. Look forward to people learning more about that. And I want to go ahead and introduce our next speaker, Tim LaSalle. I've known Tim over the last couple of years. Tim is a farmer and a Tascadero. He's also a professor emeritus at UC San Luis Obispo. He's been involved. He was also executive director, CEO at Rodale Institute. He's had a long history in agriculture, both conventional and then moving over to the regenerative agriculture model. And he's also working with people including Rosie Burrows, one of our supporters and friends here, a farmer from Central California, on a new model at Chico State around regenerative agriculture with a new research center at the university. So really glad Tim would make it. Let's give it up for Tim LaSalle.